Houston Indie Media, part of Independent Media Center's international network of producers bringing you grassroots, non-corporate coverage of global and local events.
AconC works to be a tool for freedom in content expression and an information revolution.
This week's show is brought to you by AconC Productions, news, community, and cultural conversations to agitate, organize, and cultivate. This is Angela con Courtney.
AconC Productions.
When you look to the front, you see to the rear.
In Topsy Turvy Town.
When you open your eyes, that's when you can hear.
In Topsy Turvy Town.
And things that look far away really are near. In Topsy Turvy Town.
When you say come on in, you mean go away.
In Topsy Turvy Town.
When the sun starts to rise, that's the end of the day.
In Topsy Turvy Town.
And
Santa Claus comes in the middle all day. In Topsy Turvy Town. Everyone in Topsy Turvy Town wears shoes up on their head. And when they rise to greet the day,
they jump right into bed.
all the trees are so short and the grass is so tall.
In Topsy Turvy Town.
And when they run a race, they run at a crawl.
In Topsy Turvy Town.
They call it a crowd when there's no one at all. In Topsy Turvy Town.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Houston Indie Media Show. With you this evening, we are AconC, Angela.
Con Courtney.
And, well, indeed, it is topsy-turvy. We were really wanting to get out of 2020 so that 2021 would mean a fresh start. But as we have seen since January 6th, that was not meant to be. Ever since then, indeed, everything is just topsy-turvy.
Man, everything is just straight up bat crazy. Here's what we're going to talk about today. The rise in violent crime, the creative yet different activist stock buying with GameStop stock, and a really interesting piece that you'll just have to wait until the end to hear more about. But you're going to want to stick around. So let's just jump into it.
Well, we're going to start talking about the increase in homicide across the country, but more specifically, Houston. So Chief Art Acevedo just had a press conference a few days ago and was outlining the issues with the rise in Houston homicides. And he says cooperation is the key to combating Houston's rise in violent crime. Less than a month into 2021, Houston homicide detectives are already investigating 30 cases as of Wednesday morning. And according to Acevedo, that is an increase over the same period last year. He says that it's a problem that is not unique to Houston.
It's an increase again from last year. This is, I was actually on the phone with the San Antonio Police Chief this morning. I've been on the phone with the LA Police Chief, New York Commissioner. It's a phenomenon we're seeing nationwide. And quite frankly, we've got a lot of work to do in society. After many decades in the United States of historically low violent crime, including murders, we're now into year 2 of a significant increase. And that's something that should be of concern to all Houstonians, all Texans, and quite frankly, all Americans, because it's going on in all the major cities. One of the things that we need to work on is we've got to get our court systems up and running. Up and running. I mean, look at the media's running, the police department's running, the airports are running, the schools are running, everything's running, and the courts are at a snail's pace, not just here, but across the country. We have got to get our criminal justice system up and running. We cannot afford to have close to 2,000 charged murderers here and hundreds and thousands more across the country running free, committing more crimes, taking 3 to 5 years to even bring them to trial. But ultimately, we all have to do our part. We need our community to work with us. We need them to continue to be vigilant and to actually report crime. I've been talking with Kim Ogwin, the sheriff, and we're going to have conversations to see how we can all come together.
So that was Art Acevedo at his press conference. And in it, he said that he is doing what he can with the resources that he has, which includes approving extra overtime, redirecting specialized response teams, and adding more detectives to the homicide division. And he says he is trying to do what he can internally and trying to squeeze as much as we can out of what we call 5,300 police officers that hasn't grown in 20 years. So while he talks about needing to have community connection, including his statement about working with Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez and Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg about how their agencies can work together to combat violent crime, he says stiffer charges and fewer bonds will go a long way to addressing the issue. Now, Chief Acevedo continues to say, we need to come together. This is about a cooperation with the community. However, everything that he talks about in his press conference is not about stopping homicides. Everything that he brings up are reactive points. None of it have to deal with stopping crime. And I'm certainly not seeing where overtime, scheduling changes, and adding more detectives is going to solve the problem of an actual homicide. So all these issues dealing with the crime, with dealing with the perpetrators, with prosecuting them, with keeping them in jail for longer periods of time. And it all goes back to talking about funding. So here we are back to talking about funding the police.
And I'm really glad that you bring that up, because I was interested once I heard, and I've been hearing probably since the end of 2020, that there is a significant increase in violent crime across the country. And it's not just affecting major cities, it's affecting cities of all sizes. And I was curious, what do they think the reason is? Well, it keeps coming up that many people think that the reason is because of the post-George Floyd's death, the fact that there were protests. And somehow these protests have caused an increase in violent crime. Now, immediately when I hear this, the first thing that happens is I am immediately resistant. But after digging more, I was able to come across a few articles and some journal research papers, and I have a little bit more of a clear idea. But before I get into that, let's listen to part of a piece from December that ran on PBS. It has been edited, but just take a listen to what they have to say about the increase in violent crime.
Across the U.S., murders have skyrocketed this year, while nonviolent offenses have largely dropped. That is according to publicly available crime data. But the efforts to curb homicides comes at a time when police departments are facing both staffing shortages because of the pandemic and lingering distrust in communities of color following months of nationwide protests. John Yang explores what's behind the latest trends.
Minneapolis, still reeling from this summer's police killing of George Floyd, has had 80 murders so far this year, a level not seen since the 1990s. Despite the uptick, the Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously earlier this month to shift nearly $8 million from next year's police budget. The 80% spike in Minneapolis homicides this year is part of a nationwide surge in murders during the pandemic.
We're seeing something historic here.
Jeff Asher is a crime analyst in New Orleans who has studied 2020 data for more than 50 cities.
And in those cities, murder is up about 35, 36% this year relative to last year, which To put that in some perspective, the largest national year-to-year change we've ever had is a 12.5% increase.
While most crime, including home burglaries and robberies, has gone down, murder rates have risen sharply, both in large cities like New York, Chicago, and Seattle, and in smaller ones like Lubbock, Texas, and Greensboro, North Carolina. And last month, Los Angeles reached a grim milestone. For the first time in more than a decade, 300 homicides.
This is a pandemic of violence.
Los Angeles Police Chief Michael Moore says increased gang violence and the effects of the pandemic have led to a 30% increase in killings in the nation's second largest city.
The loss of jobs, the loss of people's source of income, of their stability, of their home, of just a sense of crisis that they're in. We've seen a dramatic increase, historic increase in the number of gun sales.
Like in many U.S. cities, COVID-19 has led to police staffing shortages and handcuffed efforts to target violence.
We're not having meetings, social interactions, and engagements that we would normally have to help stem this. We've had more than 800 of our personnel that have come down with the COVID virus. We have 2 that we have lost, 2 of our employees, one an officer and one a detention officer. So we know firsthand the impact of this pandemic.
Another major factor? Lingering distrust between law enforcement and communities of color after officers killed Floyd in Minneapolis and Breonna Taylor in Louisville.
There's a huge trust factor that we are seeing in community as it pertains to law enforcement. And that didn't just start with the death of George Floyd. I will say that has definitely complicated things further.
Reverend Darren Faulkner works with at-risk individuals in Kansas City, Missouri, which this year has set a new record for homicides. He says many of the people he works with are afraid to call the police.
Fear of the police, fear to call the police. I will call 911 if I am dying. Anything short of that, I'm afraid I'm going to go to jail if I call them. And so, yeah, that's an issue that's been long-standing in the community that I serve.
Some of the biggest spikes in homicide have been in cities that had large protests over racial justice and police killings. In Louisville, for example, murders are up 77%. In Milwaukee, almost 100%.
We have to be more speculative about the connection between protest activity on the one hand and community violence on the other.
Criminologist Richard Rosenfeld says when a community loses trust in the police, violence can follow.
It could be that police have been redeployed to address the protest activity from their normal routines. It could also be that communities that have always had a somewhat fraught relationship with the police, in those communities during periods of widespread and intense protests, that relationship deteriorates even further. Street justice takes hold, and we see an increase in violent crime.
Despite the sharp increase in murders, the nation's violent crime rate is nowhere near its peak 30 years ago.
There's been a big crime drop since the early 90s with some fits and starts, and we're seeing a spike right now. But that spike, generally speaking, is taking cities back to where they were perhaps 5 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago. There are some exceptions of cities that are seeing crime, violent crime rates that they haven't seen in decades. But by and large, that's not the case.
All right. So even in the beginning of this piece, one of the first things that they talk about are the George Floyd protests after his death. So again, I almost literally, and I love PBS, I almost turned it off because that correlation between the protests and the rise in violence really reminds me and brings in a very intense way to my consciousness that in this country, it's believed that Blackness equals violence. So I didn't allow myself to get trapped by that. And I went ahead and I looked at the research and I dug a little deeper. So here's what I found, and this is according to the data. According to an article on Vox.com, again, this idea of Black Lives Matter protests causing violence is being pushed from politicians and pundits. They are continuing to provide the position that violent crime is increasing because of these protests against police violence and the movements to defund the police, and even the efforts to release people from overcrowding jails and prisons due to the coronavirus. What we do know is that violent crime is up. However, nonviolent and property crime is down. Beginning in late March, burglary, theft, robbery, and drug crimes were down, according to the Council on Criminal Justice report. Violent crimes such as shooting, aggravated assault, and murders are up. According to David Abrams, a law and public policy professor at the University of Pennsylvania, there are many factors that play into these violent crime increases. One is the fact that there is a 60% surge in gun purchases. The theory being, if more people buy guns, then more people are using guns, which results in more shootings. Another theory, that families have faced illness and even death from COVID, and now those families face barriers maintaining structures and routines, and that upheaval is somehow creating a situation where more violence is occurring. Again, it's a theory. What we do know is, just in general, violent crime tends to spike in the summer during the months when the heat is at its highest, and then it drops back down as people retreat into their homes as the weather cools down and becomes cold. Here's what else we know. Crime did briefly increase after the protests against police violence. There was a small spike, but it was so insignificant, so small that it could have been the incidents of property damage and other things of that nature being reported that caused there to be a registered spike. However, in the mainstream media, most of the coverage focused on riots, looting, and scenes of chaos, when the fact of the matter is 93% of all BLM protests were peaceful. Researchers at the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project analyzed more than 7,750 demonstrations from 2,400 locations, and they found that less than 7% were violent. And we also found, as we've stated in previous shows, that the FBI reported that when there were violent crimes that took place, those individuals that were arrested and charged with felonies were not BLM protesters, were not Antifa protesters. They were actually people from the Boogaloo movement. Another point, militarized responses to the protests actually increased violence by creating a situation where the public formed a deeper distrust in police. When the people don't trust the police, it can lead to more unreported crime. So that's some of what I found. Possibly by curbing the pandemic, that may be a way to get the crime rate to go back down. And then secondly, police reform. As there continues to be this cycle of violence perpetuated, basically it starts with an unarmed Black man is shot. Then there's protests. Then there's a militarized response to the protest. Then the people distrust the police. Then the police shoot an unarmed Black man. And then there's protests. And then there's a militarized response to the protest. So if we can, I guess, very quickly combat institutionalized racism and get the police to respond differently to communities of color, where communities of color are not ending up dead, that is also another way to curb this violent crimes. But the reality of the situation is, just like we've all seen, the response in the justice system has not been blind and is not equal. And we see it, you've seen it in that has to be addressed.
Absolutely. It's not just about the disproportionate response in the justice system, but even before that, the disproportionate response and reaction of the police at the moment of the event. As we saw with the event at the Capitol, the difference, the marked difference when there's one race versus the other, peaceful versus violent, angry mob behavior. And absolutely, that has to change.
I'm thinking it's all over when I go out drinking. Oh, making my mind slow. That's why I don't with the big 4-0, bro. I got to maintain, cause a like me is going insane. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the brain. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the membrane.
So I'm sure you've seen it. It's everywhere. The issue with stocks, shorting stocks, GameStop, AMC, Nokia, BlackBerry. I don't know about you, but I sort of like it when the little guy wins. And I think that it is really cool that this whole movement started as a thread on a Reddit page, and it got momentum, and they were able to beat the big bad hedge funds at their own game. And I am so here for it.
Yeah, it's definitely a wild ride. So I know that these hedge funds were, to put it mildly, not happy to be losing these billions, was it?
Yeah.
Billions of dollars. I mean,
that's what happens when you gamble. They took a gamble and they lost.
That feels good, and honestly, I had to, I was looking at all the reporting and I dug a little deeper, as we love to say, about how that whole thing works. And I think I sort of understand it, but I don't. I mean, it all seems quite insane. But I do think it's interesting, and there's so many people that I guess are conflicted as to what rules apply to whom and when. So I know Robinhood and a few other trading companies, announced these limits that was not allowing these traders.
Oh yeah, all of the company, not just Robinhood. Nobody is allowing. No one is.
None of them are allowing. Okay, yeah, allowing them to. They can only sell, but they can't buy anymore. But the hedge funds can still keep going. So that doesn't seem fair. And so I know that these restrictions, I read that, they received some bipartisan criticism, and that Robinhood has already been hit with a class action lawsuit filed in the Southern District of New York that claims that the company purposefully, willfully, and knowingly removing the stock of GME from its trading platform in the midst of an unprecedented stock rise, thereby deprived retail investors of the ability to invest in the open market and manipulating the open market. So I wish the little guy the best in this, because it does seem that there are double standards between big giant hedge funds and small investors.
So once it became clear that these companies like Ameritrade, Robinhood, any other trading company that allowed regular people to engage in the stock market, once it became clear that they were preventing sales for regular people, but allowing hedge fund people to continue trading in an attempt to maybe correct the price, because what happened is it caused the price of the stock to drop for GameStop specifically. Well, as that happened at 10:47 a.m. on Thursday, AOC tweeted this. This is unacceptable. We need to know more about @Robinhood's app's decision to block retail investors from purchasing stock while hedge funds are freely able to trade the stock as they see fit. As a member of the Financial Services Committee, I'd support a hearing if necessary, right? So later that day, Ted Cruz saw the tweet. Yes, Houston's own Ted Cruz. And he retweeted it and included an emoji of a finger pointing down to the tweet and said, fully agree. Well, this is how AOC responded. I am happy to work with Republicans on this issue where there's common ground, but you almost had me murdered 3 weeks ago, so you can sit this one out. Happy to work with almost any other GOP that aren't trying to get me killed. In the meantime, if you want to help, you can resign. And I totally agree with AOC on that. At this time, I don't see how Ted Cruz can truthfully represent both Democrats and Republicans in his constituency. And because of the positions that he's chosen to take, in my opinion, the best action for him is to resign. And so, Ted Cruz, I have a little song for you. Here it is.
I know you'd like to thank you. Don't stay, but lean a little bit closer. See, roses really smell like boo boo boo. Yeah, roses really smell like boo boo boo. I know you'd like to thank you. Don't stay, but lean a little bit closer. See, roses really smell like boo boo boo. Yeah, roses really smell like boo boo boo.
This week, one of the sources of news that I turn to called TYT, or the Young Turks, which is an online-based independent media source. They have several shows on several different forms of internet-based venues. They are an independent source that I personally enjoy going to for something outside of the mainstream opinion. This week, one of their reporters, her name is Anna, did what I think was an extraordinary job on really connecting the dots and tying together some ideas that are very, in the theme of this show, topsy-turvy and very hard to connect. She was able to do the research, dig a little deeper, and connect the ideas. And I personally would like to give her an applause. I think it was a wonderful piece. So we're going to play probably 90% of this segment where she is able to tie together how some on the far right are almost faking being interested in concepts like BLM or Antifa in order to get more people on their side as they strive to get rid of the government. And the sort of scary part is that for some people that are either centrist or maybe more left-leaning, they seem to be falling for it. So when I heard this, first, I just don't understand how a group who literally 1 week is racist and white supremacist, and then the next week they're like, yeah, we like BLM, we support Antifa. I don't understand how someone who has that information is able to forget that they were white supremacists last week. But it seems to be happening. And it's very important because I think we're currently in a time where it is becoming more and more difficult to know what the truth is. And news is happening at such a fast rate that it's very easy to forget what even happened 3 days ago, let alone a month ago or a season ago. So we're going to listen to Anna. She's going to break some things down. I was very excited when I heard this, and I am glad to be sharing this with you today. This is the piece de resistance for the show that I was hoping, if you started with us at the beginning, that you continue to listen to the end because it's very good.
On the left, it's important to understand how critical it is to win. And in order to win, we need to clearly differentiate individuals that we can align ourselves with and work with strategically, and individuals who we absolutely cannot work with because they do not share a common goal. They might pretend to share a common goal. They might say a few things here and there that we agree with. But we need to think about what individuals and various groups fundamentally represent, whether or not they have a material understanding of the problems that we're facing today, and whether or not they believe in a collectivist approach that is necessary to transform what we're going through in this country. Now, one group that I agree is definitely not worth working with is the Boogaloo Boys. So let me make my case as to why. Far-right Boogaloo Boys linked to killing of California law officers and other violence. That is a headline from the Los Angeles Times in the summer of 2020. Now, you might have issues with police brutality and policing in general in this country, and I certainly do. However, I do not believe that any situation that involves murder makes sense. I do not agree with violence. I do not agree with killing anyone, including ambushing cops sitting in a police patrol car and then opening fire on them. Authorities said a California man accused of killing a police officer and a federal agent in June scrawled the word "boog" in blood on the hood of a car during a standoff with police. Federal agents arrested 2 other members of the Boogaloo movement whom they accused of offering to work with the terrorist group Hamas. Now, the Boogaloo Boys are a loosely tied group of anti-government extremists. At the core of what they believe is we do not need the government, we must do away with the government. There are elements of the Boogaloo Boys that are, full of white supremacists and racists. Others claim that they are not racist. But at the heart of what they believe is this notion that we must do away with the government. Taxation is theft. These are not people who believe in the policies that we want to champion, including Medicare for all. These are individuals who want to do away with government by any means necessary, including exploiting racial tensions in this country to spark a race war, to spark their fantasy world of starting a civil war that would get people killed. Now, they're also, by the way, the people who are behind the plot to possibly murder Gretchen Whitmer. They certainly were planning and plotting to kidnap her. And she's the governor of Michigan who had this scandalous idea of trying to keep people safe during the pandemic by shutting down some businesses. And so federal prosecutors say that 3 white men with US military experience are accused of conspiring to carry out a plan that began in April of 2020 in conjunction with protests to reopen businesses closed because of the coronavirus. More recently, they sought to capitalize on protests over the death of George Floyd. They wanted to use the momentum from riots occurring nationwide because of Floyd's death to, quote, hopefully stir enough confusion and excitement that others see the explosions and police presence and begin to riot in the streets out of anger, the complaint said. One of the men, Andrew Leenham, instructed the group to observe the riots occurring nationwide and use the momentum as a driving force to possibly take action against a fee station at Lake Mead on federal land north of the Hoover Dam on May 30th. Other targets discussed included a US Forest Service ranger station. These are people who want to engage in acts of terror. They want to commit murder. They want to harm innocent people because they do not believe in government. That's who these people are. Let me give you more. 3 men were arrested on the way to a protest in downtown Las Vegas. By the way, it was a Black Lives Matter protest. After filling gas cans at a parking lot and making Molotov cocktails in glass bottles. So they would show up to Black Lives Matter protests, not because they see themselves as allies to Black people in this country who have been persecuted by police brutality and police in general. They want to and wanted to exploit these protests in order to spark a full-blown civil war, because in their minds, that civil war could lead to them overthrowing the government. That's what they want to do. That is their plan, okay? That is at the heart of what the Boogaloo Boys believe. They are right-wing extremists, and whether some of them claim to be white supremacists or not, what matters here is that they do not have the same goals as we do here on the left. We want to empower workers. We want a collectivist approach. We want general strikes. We want people to understand their power and use it in order to reform the government and ensure that our lawmakers actually represent our best interests. It's about empowering other people, not overthrowing the government. With that said, it was curious when Jimmy Dore decided to bring up the Boogaloo Boys and put out some weird commentary that essentially rehabilitates their reputation. And he did so without any real research. In fact, the extent of his research was revealed live on air. And this is what that looked like.
A man who aligns with Boogaloo Boys. Who are the Boogaloo Boys? What is that? I don't even know what that is. Do you, Ron?
I don't know.
Is that like the Proud Boys?
I think
Steph,
so.
look up Boogaloo
I'll look
Boys.
at Boogaloo. My guess is they're Proud Boys who like to dance.
I think they're probably Proud Boys with rhythm. So this guy went to the state capitol in Michigan and he gave this speech. Now, Ron, I want you to listen to this speech and tell me how much of this you agree with. Because we're told these people are maniacs.
Yes, they're loosely organized, far-right, anti-government, and extremist political movement in the United States, according to Wiki.
Okay.
So anti-government should have, maybe lit a light bulb in Jimmy Dore's head, but it didn't. It didn't. The complimentary commentary continued. I want to give you a little more of that. Let's watch.
Antifa, Boogaloo, and right-wing militias.
Yes, he says BLM, Antifa, Boogaloo, and right-wing militias are not the problem. That's what he's saying. Let's listen to it again.
Antifa, Boogaloo, and right-wing militias, they are the antibodies, not the disease that is destroying our country.
They are the antibodies, he says, not the disease destroying our country.
The disease is a country run by 2 corrupt political parties that do not care about you. So deeply incestuous with corporations that they are indistinguishable from each other.
So what's happening there is a right-wing militia guy reaching out to the left-wing people in BLM and Antifa saying we have more in common than our government wants us to think. Did he say anything there that you could disagree with, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, in theme, I think everything he's saying really just paints the picture of what's going on societally. I don't know if this guy's with any particular group or if he's just a guy making a speech. I mean, I don't know who he is, but yeah, I mean, I think he's right on that. It's like, this is the system that's oppressing the American people.
So just to answer Ron's question, the person that they're speaking about is in fact a Boogaloo boy, and they learned that later because, of course, Jimmy Dore decided to interview him in an interview that was titled on Jimmy's YouTube channel, "Radicalized Michigan Anarchist Seeks Unity with the Left." So already this narrative regarding how we should work with the Boogaloo boys is becoming a dominant talking point among Jimmy Dore and his followers, which is strange when you consider that these are people who want to overthrow the government, and Jimmy decided to viciously attack progressive lawmakers because they didn't follow suit with his performative strategy to get Medicare for all, which, by the way, wouldn't have worked, but nonetheless. Medicare for all is by definition government-run healthcare. Now, what else did Jimmy have to say during his interview with this guy? Let's watch.
Instead of demonizing people because they don't hold the exact same set in stone ideology that we have, and if you actually traveled around America as I have, you will find people's ideologies are wildly inconsistent and always in flux and constantly changing. If there are people who are pro-LGBTQ, against war, against the corporate dominance of the state, people who reject the two-party duopoly and who work alongside Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and they want a general strike, well, we have to be able to talk to those people, because if we can't talk to those people, that's bad. That shows the weakness on our side.
These people would also, like to do away with everything our government represents, including our Constitution, which, by the way, offers protections for ordinary American workers. But I guess that's not important because, hey, one of these Boogaloo boys said in a speech that he likes BLM. In fact, Jimmy continued his social media, PR for the Boogaloo boys by tweeting this. I interviewed a member of the Boogaloo boys. I was completely floored when he said he is pro-LGBTQ, pro-Black Lives Matter, anti-police brutality, anti-racism, anti-ICE, anti-war, WTF. Marginalized Michigan anarchist seeks unity with the left. I watched the Democrats debate one another during the Democratic primaries, and I was absolutely floored when Amy Klobuchar referred to herself as a progressive. But it turns out that people lie, right? People lie all the time, including the Boogaloo boys who, oopsie daisy, in their own Discord, made it abundantly clear that they intended on lying to the American people to rebrand themselves in order to exploit unrest in this country to spark their fantasy of a civil war. Let me provide the receipts, since I actually do my research. Here's a few of them. I agree with Pat Henry. I think publicly throwing our support, both verbally and on the streets, behind anti-ICE people and BLM could produce a huge shift in public opinion, at least in the younger generations. Let me give you another one. Salesmen, I don't want to protest with them, but to have a cause they sympathize with would help us gain support from people on that side of the spectrum. We want people's support, not the parties. And I'll give you one more. If we were gonna do that, we should be consulting leaders from their Twitter communities. That's how most movements other than ours get out there. And if we can get Black Twitter and LGBT Twitter, we could turn the tide of the soft war. These are people who want to exploit others in order to spark a civil war because they want to overthrow the government and everything that comes along with it, including constitutional protections. But for a man who claims he wants Medicare for all, Jimmy Dore, who has gone to great lengths to demonize Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other members of the squad, progressive lawmakers, women of color, It is curious that he now sees this weird allyship with people who want to overthrow our government. Because I guarantee you, there is not a single Boogaloo boy who believes in Medicare for all. Since they're anti-government and anti-collectivist action, I guarantee you that they do not want to sign on to the Green New Deal or anything that would actually combat climate change. I guarantee you that they don't represent any of our goals. They might have similar frustrations with our system of government as it stands today, but it's for reasons that differ from the left. And we need to be absolutely clear on that. And I do want to give you an example of how Jimmy Dore, spoke about Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she refused to utilize his strategy of forcing a vote on Medicare for all on the House floor. And in order to do that, she would withhold her vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. She and other progressives did hold their vote in order to get carve-outs from PAYGO, which might sound boring, it's not sexy, but guess what? It's an actual legislative win that clears the path to pass legislation that we want. Again, it's not sexy, but without those PAYGO carve-outs, which are written in such a broad way that they apply to things like Medicare for all, we would not get Medicare for all. The performative vote on force the vote, or with force the vote, would fail, and proponents of force the vote acknowledge that. I would argue that it's just a little more effective to hold your vote for the speaker and get something substantive in return. And that is what progressives did with these PAYGO carve-outs. But putting that aside, I do want to present this video of Jimmy Dore viciously attacking AOC for not going along with his antics.
And this is to keep you from healthcare. That's what this is. This is to keep you from healthcare because she's a gutless wonder who will not do what she promised. And you don't get her to do what you want her to do by being nice to her. You get her to do what she's supposed to do by ripping her to shreds, which is what I'm doing right now, because she has it coming. And it's not just her, they all do. She's the only one engaging on Twitter, which is why she's getting it. What it takes is courage from gutless wonders like you, AOC, you phony, and you're revealing yourself, and I am just writing it down. We are you're doing it, and we're marking it. This is her outing herself as a gaslighting mother because you're broken. Because you're corrupted and co-opted. And now we got to lay on you as hard as we can. Everybody sees through you. Everybody sees through you.
Fascinating, because Jimmy Dore simply could not see through the Boogaloo boys, who he was incredibly complimentary toward, who he believed at face value as being good people that we should work with. When it came to AOC, someone who actually is fighting for the policies that we want, oh, she's just a gutless wonder.
So again, that was only part of the entire show where Anna Kasparian broke down some very intense facts about the Boogaloo Boys, about these sort of sections of each party that are, I don't know what the word is, confused, maybe blinded by the need to create a change that they know people want to see. But there was a lot to unpack. And for me, the things that most stood out is for us to really think about the things that are truly important. What are the real changes that we know we want to see, and how we feel we best can achieve those? And definitely doing this, looking at not just what people are saying right now, but what they have been saying, what they have been doing. And as she breaks it down, of course, when now, these Boogaloo boys or their supporters are saying, sure, we're willing to work with you, they are outwardly saying we're willing to say anything and work with anybody if it gives us the results that we want. And what they want is civil war. Other thing that they talked about was talking about, let's not be fooled. When we see people like, Susan Collins, who now, is trying to call herself a moderate Republican, he says, let's not get this twisted. There aren't really moderate Republicans. There are just quiet radicals. And it is really scary to see how people one day are adhering to one philosophy and the next moment they are completely trying to whitewash what they have been doing and what they have been saying, which is not representing the people. I think that when these Boogaloo Boys say, we want people support, not parties, that's all good and well. But when they say we want people support, they want anyone's support at the moment that gets them their objective. And they're focusing on their objective, not on what should be the broad people's objectives. And one of the things that Anna pointed out earlier in the show, she talked about the dire economic state of the country and how people, when they are tired, when they are frustrated, when they are confused and do not feel confident about where this country is going, it is easy to feel like you just want to have any solution and you want to do anything to try to get a solution. And that is when people are vulnerable to believing these, let's just reach across the aisle. And while there may be some people that are not as extremist as this, she doesn't feel that everybody that voted for Trump is completely lost, that we're not able to work with them. But there is a difference between those people and these right-wing extremists. And so this is a very scary time because we need to be very careful and really adhere to the integrity of what we want to see this country move towards.
That is all the time that we have with you today. If you want to let us know what you think about everything we were unpacking today, or if you want to catch any of our previous shows, you can find us at AconC Media, AconC Media, on Instagram and on Mixcloud. Houston Indie Media would not be possible without the help and the generous support of our listeners. Help keep us on your Friday night dial by going to kpft.org and go to the Donate Now button. Don't forget to choose Houston Indie Media from the drop-down menu. It's fast, easy, and you help keep independent radio alive. Thank you for your support. This was Angela.
Courtney.
Reminding you, don't hate the media.
Be the media.
Peace.
Peace.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. And when you're out there without care, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
little, it look like fun. If there's no coincidence, I've come. And I can die when I'm done. But maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you're crazy. Maybe we're crazy.
Yes. Were you trying to get crazy with this, eh? Don't you know I'm loco?
The one on the flamboyant temper, just toss that ham in the frying pan like spam. Get done when I come and slam. Damn, I feel like the son of Sam. Don't make me wreck. Hectic, next to the check, got me going like General Electric. And the lights are blinking. I'm thinking it's all over when I go out drinking. Oh, making my mind slow. That's why I don't with the big 4-0, bro. I got to maintain, cause a like me is going insane. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the brain. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the membrane.
Too much undercover, now it's time for the blubber. Blabber, to watch that belly get fatter. Fat boy on a diet. Don't try it. Attack your ass like a looter in a riot. My shit fat like a sumo, slamming that ass, leaving your face in the grass. Did you know I don't take a dulo lightly? Don't just jealous cause you can't outright me. Yo, kick that style, wicked, wow. Happy face, you never seen me smile. Rip that mainframe, I'll explain. A nigga like me is going insane.
Insane in the membrane. Insane in the brain. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the brain. Insane in the membrane. Insane got no brain. Insane in the membrane. Insane in the brain. Insane in the Like Louis Armstrong, play the trumpet, I'll hit that bong and break you off something soon. I got to get my props, cops come and try to snatch my crops. These pigs wanna blow my house down, head underground to the next town. They get mad when they come to raid my pad.